everyone. So excited to be welcoming the one and the only Maggie Olson.
You're so sweet.
So, for those of you who might not know, Maggie Olson is the founder of Nova Chief of Staff, the premier destination for Chief of Staff education and development. So, without further ado, I'd love to pass it off to Maggie to add a lot more color actually, to her wonderful background.
Stay on
It's
the
so funny. I'm
the
trying to have
color
fun,
theme. We'll see
and
if we
I
can do
already
that.
am. Yes.
Amazing. Cool. Well, I love this. I'm super happy to be here. I recognize a lot of the names on the call. So, we are in a Zoom format versus a webinar format. So, what that means just for all of you guys is that like we talked about earlier, you can you can put yourself on video if you'd like. And because we only have about 20 people here, that this feels like a really nice intimate sized group to have a dialogue, have discussion, ask questions. Feel free to raise your hand and we will like literally just stop and ask and answer the question as we go. I would prefer this to just be like a little more casual of a conversation versus a presentation. I do that a lot. So happy to have this group on here and just have a conversation about what we're diving into. So thanks for being here. Super excited for the opportunity to talk about basically kind of all things chief of staff and the tie into the relevance for future entrepreneurs. Um, so what we're going to do today is dive into what the chief of staff role is, why CEOs need them, what the benefit is for entrepreneurs to understand the chief of staff role, to be in the chief of staff role, to observe the chief of staff role. There's a lot of benefits. And then we'll talk about like kind of tactically some job description things. So maybe in the chat, you can comment what you're most interested in learning about today. I'm going to go through all those things, but it'll help me understand, do we have a lot of future entrepreneurs here? Do we have current entrepreneurs here? Are we looking to really dive into job description? Are we looking to sink into the foundations of chief of staff work? We're going to do those things, but it'll help me understand the audience a bit. If you want to pop into the chat, please feel free to. So let me turn that chat on. Cool. Thanks, Sharon. Developing skills to become a chief of staff from EA. Okay. Okay. Well, we can potentially go through a few different things here. So what I would love is if you raise your hand, if you stop me, if you want to come off mute at any time, I will stop at certain times to check for questions too. But just know that like you don't have to wait till the end. Definitely not, because we're going to go through a few different things. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is really kind of what is a chief of staff and why do CEOs need them? If you've talked to me before, attended a webinar conversation, you've probably heard some of these same things. But the chief of staff role is complex enough that we need to hear about it a lot. I have only become strong at talking about the chief of staff role because I talk about it all the time. It's complex, it's nitty gritty, there's a lot of nuance. The chief of staff role truly exists for CEOs and business leaders to be able to remain focused on the most important things, which I classify as future vision, growth, strategy, leadership. Eyes up, looking forward. So if you're imagining a business leader, you want them in this vision space. Now, we've all worked with business leaders, and sometimes that can feel like idea whiplash, right? When there's like, let's do this, let's catch this, let's go after this. Oh, I have another idea. It can be a little crazy if we don't have systems and processes to capture and manage all those things. But truly, we want CEOs and founders and entrepreneurs to be in that visionary space. That's where they should be. And a chief of staff and other support folks, EA is for sure included in that, help founders, entrepreneurs, business leaders, CEOs stay in the vision space. Another thing that makes the chief of staff role really complex is that I like to say that it's everywhere and it's nowhere. So you will find the chief of staff role in big business, small business, startup, public, private, media, sports, entertainment, healthcare, education, higher education. I could just go on. And then you can walk into any of those places the next day in a different business, same industry, and they will have never heard of the chief of staff role. So it makes it a little bit tough. So I take on the awareness and education component of my job very seriously. Happy to always talk about kind of what that chief of staff role is. Um, Finally, one of the other things that makes the role really complex is that to understand, it's complex in other ways for other reasons, but why it's hard to understand, why it's hard to identify and pinpoint is because it operates under like 20 to 25, maybe more different titles in addition to chief of staff. And so there's probably some of you on this call that are like, yep, that's me. I'm a business planning manager. I'm a director of transformative business. I mean, I hear these titles all the time. And that's why I have a running list. You can go to novachiefofstaff.com/blog and find a blog that we put together around all the different titles of chief of staff work, and some guidance too around like, okay, how do you choose your title? And it really just depends on what your company's likelihood to adopt it is, what your seniority level is, and the work, the work style that you're going to be doing. Um, so I think another thing to touch on here is that the best way to, because it is hard to identify, it operates under different titles. The best way to spot a chief of staff is just like an EA, it reports to a person. And it reports to a person, and not only reports to a person, but it exists on behalf of the person. It exists to support that person, like an EA. Unlike a chief operating officer or a CMO or a, HR leader, they have their own categories of business, their own scorecards, their own full functions. They may have chiefs of staff and EAs who report to them and exist to support them. But that's really how you identify what the chief of staff role might be, even if it's not under that title. So, for example, I get questions on my new student calls at Nova Chief of Staff really often that are like, okay, I want to be a chief of staff, but all the chiefs of staff at my company for the C-suite are like ex-McKinsey, Bain, 10 years consulting. Okay, I get it. We can't control that. All right. What my advice is in this kind of situation is to identify the people who are operating as chiefs of staff for slightly lower level leaders, and not low level leaders, right? They're still directors, still VPs, they're still like definitely business leaders. But they also often have people on their team acting as chiefs of staff and under different titles. Business operations manager is like very common. The way to spot that is go to the all hands meeting. Who's the one controlling the slides? Who's the one putting the material together? Who's the one giving the script to the leader before they're coming out and chatting? Who's the person that when you email that team to ask for something, who's the one actually doing the work, even though it's coming from the VP? That is oftentimes the person doing chief of staff style work. And you can identify that at a slightly lower level than the C-suite if your chiefs of staff and your C-suite are 10-year veterans with consulting experience. So moving a little bit on here to kind of and then I'm going to pause in a second here and we'll get some questions I think I saw. Nia, you're welcome to come off mute and do that for me here in a second. But basically, here are the two definitions that I will share. For a chief of staff, I describe the chief of staff as a business leader's right hand and strategic thought partner focused on executing, organizing, and prioritizing the leader's business initiatives and driving transparency and alignment across the leadership team. I could talk for another hour about all the things they are doing within business planning, business prioritization, rhythm of business, events, communications, newsletters, employee culture. There's a lot, right? It kind of depends on the needs of the business and the gaps that the chief of staff is filling and the priorities. But when we look at a senior EA definition to kind of compare the two, a senior executive assistant, I describe as a highly skilled problem solver, a strategic doer, and the logistical mastermind behind the executive's calendar, travel, expenses, while often acting as the go-to support lead for tactical items across the whole executive team. So most often you're going to find, I think, feel free to disagree with me in the comments here, but probably 99 out of 100 EA jobs have will always have calendaring, expensing, kind of those logistical components, travel to them. Whereas the chief of staff role is also highly organized and has to have a level of admin work to it. But the chief of staff has to be able to also focus on the vision, the future. There's a term like see the forest and the trees, be able to understand the leaders' initiatives, future initiatives, and be excellent at executing for the goal of the future for that strategic work. So I am going to talk in a minute about what I think makes a great chief of staff. And maybe a little bit around the chief of staff role varying, but why don't I pause and take some questions here?
Love that. Thanks, Maggie, for starting us off with defining what chief of staff even really means, and also recognizing and calling in that there are many different titles. So with that said, some of the questions that pertain to this particular umbrella, Dana had asked, how do we balance technical chief of staff with operational or other? And we can start there and I'll share the next one afterwards.
Yeah, I think that if you're a technical chief of staff, you've probably been in technical positions throughout your background. So I was just chatting with the technical chief of staff for, I think, like a highly technical product on a product technology team. You're going to know if you are well suited for a highly technical role. It's probably one of the more specialized functions of chief of staff work. You're probably going to have to understand, and I'm not an expert on this, but understand the Jira, the Confluence, the project management, the waterfall, all of those things in a technical way to support the leader. And it's going to be specific. Like if you look at a massive company, they probably have a few, maybe one or two chief operators who are in a technical space who need a technical chief of staff. But I think almost 95% or more are going to be in the more general category. Does that help? I don't know if I'm quite an expert on the topic to speak more in the technical component, but maybe there's some people popping in there to help.
Yes, thank you so much. And I think Dana also did add a bit of context here that for her, she's not as technical, but she does have familiarity. And also, Dana, if you'd love to hop off on mute, happy to share what you wrote in the comments for you. But I always love it when our own community members can definitely show up and we have the platform to do so. So feel free to hop off on mute if you'd like. And in the
Sure.
meantime, oh, perfect.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just in between sessions. It's noon my time, but I work focused with the Portuguese time zone. So this
Oh
is
yeah.
kind of their end of the day. So we're closing on a lot of initiatives right now. But yeah, thanks so much. And I'm excited to join this. So I have interest in chief of staff role. I've actually worked very closely with C-suite for several years. And so I've kind of like danced around the title of chief of staff, but never really, I guess, in the way that my roles have operated, I've had really great leaders that allowed me to flourish. But now I'm kind of trying to aim more for that technical title.
Mhm.
I don't have as much technical background specifically in the software area. That's the industry that I'm working in. We do have a technical chief of staff currently in operation, but he really relies on the EAs as a supportive kind of team, if you will, to kind of supplement all the other operational and strategic applications for the goals and initiatives that we're trying to make happen for the company. So my question is that in a case like this, does it make sense from a business standpoint to still employ or to approach, um, right now I don't have like a trajectory saying, okay, my next level is chief of staff, but my company is such that they would encourage the inquiry for that. So would it be something that I would say, okay, I want a chief of staff role, but obviously I don't have the technical piece, so it would be partnering with the current technical chief of staff, or how would we approach that?
I think with the information I have, if you are interested in a technical chief of staff position and you think that you do a great job at it and that your company needs it, I would probably have like a series of one-on-ones with technical chiefs of staff, whether you work with them or maybe they're people that you connect with or network into or that you know, and talk about kind of the fundamentals of the role, grasp onto the pieces that you think you'd be good at, and and I always give this recommendation, put a recommendation together for what you want your role to be and a proposal for what this could look like and why you'd be great at it. And don't say, I've never been a technical chief of staff before. I know you're just sharing that with me, but that's something that people often share. Hey, I've never done this, but I know I can do it. Just lean into the fact that here's what it's going to take. Here's what I'm prepared to do. Here's what it needs because of the information you've gathered. You know these things. And that I would make a great technical chief of staff for you. So
Totally.
I'd
Yeah. I'm
suggest
thinking right
starting
off.
there.
I'm totally thinking off the top of my head. And really, to be quite honest, I don't have as much interest on the technical side, but I do think it's a vital piece to the role that I need to have that wherewithal to be able to, truly
Yeah.
support initiatives and strategies. So I guess it would just, I guess from a different standpoint, does it make sense to have multiple chief of staffs supporting? Like, is that something that they typically do? I've seen it so many different ways, depending upon the industry, but I'm just trying to understand what kind of best practice for chief of staffs are kind of in existence around
So
the industry.
yeah, so generally a chief of staff, there's one chief of staff to one executive. Oftentimes EAs are supporting like 10 executives. I was just on a student call with like 5 EAs and they all had 5 or more executives they were supporting. Chiefs of staff, that's a lot less common. It does happen sometimes, but generally the chief of staff exists to support one person so that those initiatives, that person is at the forefront of everything that they're doing. And so that also they have no skin in the game anywhere else. They can make unbiased decisions on behalf of the person they're working for. So that's, I would suggest that it's probably one chief of staff per executive, but it doesn't have to be only in the C-suite. Like directors can have a chief of staff, VPs have chiefs of staff. Like it really can span. And oftentimes those folks are operating under different titles. The last thing I'll say here is that it's also not uncommon at all for chiefs of staff to have a team. When I was in my last chief of staff role corporately, I built a team of 7 or 8 of us doing different chief of staff responsibilities. This person was on executive engagements. This person was on business planning. This person was on employee programs, et cetera, et cetera. So it could be where another opportunity is like to identify where you could do chief of staff work if you're not yet, is identify the chief of staff and consider adding value to their team under their umbrella working for them. So hopefully that helps other folks on the call too, because I know we're getting a little bit specific here. But Dana,
That was
you're welcome to email us or come or send us a note on LinkedIn, and we can help you a little bit more too.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you
And that
bet.
was fabulous, Maggie. We do have a couple more questions in the chat, but I think you mentioned that you're going to go over a bit more detail. So maybe some of these questions might be answered in your next section here.
Sure. I'll chat for a few more minutes about the chief of staff role, and then we can get to chief of staff general questions, and then we can kind of dive into the entrepreneur section. So I think what, a lot of folks on here, you already know you want to be chiefs of staff, but I talk a lot to people who either don't know they're already doing the work or they don't know about the role. Or often, like a lot of us, we didn't know that it operates under other titles besides chief of staff. So if you are an executive assistant on the call or a biz ops person, not quite doing chief of staff work yet, you're wanting to get into it, the people who are really great and I think great fits for the chief of staff role, both personally and just like what they're going to enjoy doing and who would make a good chief of staff, I'm just going to name off a bunch of things. Fast, driven, curious, growth-minded, executive presence, achievement-focused, great at a lot of things, wants more responsibility, loves the idea of supporting leadership. To expand on that a little bit, loves the idea of learning a company from the top down from business leaders, feels really comfortable interfacing with high-level executives, or, it's not always comfortable, but is okay with it. The politics sometimes come in there, networking, all of those things. And I think, somebody who is highly organized, but it doesn't have to all be in the same way as everybody else. So when I speak to students, the way I describe it is like, okay, are you the person in your friend group who is coordinating all the trips for your group. You have the Excel, like the Google Sheets, the shared drives, you've got all the Airbnbs, you're planning everything, the flights. Is that you? You're extremely organized. If you are are you the one who's taking like color-coded notes with sticky notes and like all the different things, and you're like, everyone's like, what? This is crazy. That's enough organization, right? We're all organized in different ways. It doesn't have to look the same, but having kind of a passion and a strong, I guess, like ability with organizational components is really important as a chief of staff too. And then I think, the last piece here is that the chief of staff really can vary greatly. Earlier, I talked about all the different industries that you'll find the chief of staff role in, big, small, et cetera. There's also so many different levels of chiefs of staff that I've touched on. There's different tasks that you're going to dive into depending on the business needs, based on your product. If you're a product focused company, a customer experience focused company, based on the values of the company, for example, like being frontline focused or employee first. A lot of people say that, but are they really? Depending on those values, your role is could look completely different. So that's important to keep in mind when you're looking for chief of staff roles, because sometimes people will go through the job hunt and they'll find a chief of staff job description and it'll be like, let's say it's a bit more complex in the finance world. That job just might not be for you if that's not who you are. Most chief of staff roles are not that. Most chief of staff roles, from a finance, especially because this is a hot topic for folks, because everybody has a little lack of confidence here, which is normal. For the finance perspective, my feedback is always just get to know deeply the 5 to 10 most important metrics that exist in your company. Learn them deeply, learn, how they move, how they work together, numerator, denominator, what are the things, how do they work? And then build yourself resources through people that you can have deep dives with, like a little finance 101 into the business of your business. People love to talk about their job. Don't go super deep, but build a relationship so that you have the ability to go deep when you need to. But one of the things people love about the chief of staff role is that it is breadth. It's a high volume of breadth, not intense depth. And in fact, if we are intensely deep on something like finance, we're not going to have the time to be great at our jobs in other ways that are really important. So it's a breadth, not depth game, but the ability to dive deep when you need to has to be there. So some of that's confidence and some of that's building resources and just kind of trusting yourself. So I'm going to pause there. That's what I had planned to talk about for the chief of staff role, but I know there's a lot of questions. So we can totally dive into those now if we want.
Maggie, you're a popular one, and I love all the questions that are coming out. Everyone's getting me exercising with all these questions. So gonna just raffle off a few. You mentioned job hunting and everything as a chief of staff. We do have a couple of questions that people have posed. So I'm gonna start off with the first one. When looking for a chief of staff role, how do you position yourself as a generalist when you come from a very specific industry?
Okay. I would probably say that you probably are more of a generalist than you think. The industry is not the only part of being a generalist or being a specialist. It could also be leadership. It could be diverse teams. It can be working styles in person. It could be, virtual. It can be demographics of people that you work with. It could be material that you work on and your tech stacks, right? There's a lot of ways to think about the way, like your personal diversity of your career versus just the one aspect of maybe the product or the industry you've been in. So I would probably just sit back, and my answer to a lot of things is to reflect, like truly sit back and spend 20 minutes, kind of maybe bubble mapping what are all those things, and then keep going. And then spend some time thinking about what are you most drawn to of all of those items that you've thought about. What do you enjoy the most? What does this company need the most? And lean into those areas, have some examples for those areas. But yeah, my guess is that you're more of a generalist. And if you're not, think about ways that you can build that generalist experience in your current job. So maybe it's taking on a project outside of your current scope, or sort of dotted line managing a intern or somebody on another team that's helping you with a project. And then it's all about how you position that experience in conversation and on your resume.
And speaking of resume, Michael had actually asked, do you have any particular tips? I know you gave a lot of really great golden nuggets here. Do you have any specific tips for how aspiring chief of staffs can frame them, or generalists can frame themselves in a resume?
You know, my resume tips are to, and most people, it's hard. It's hard. Most people's resumes are not this, but to take your resume and turn your bullets under each section, which should only be, 4 or 5 maybe bullets for each job, and turn them into achievements. I achieved this. I led this. Use data where you can. If you're like, we saw a 10% improvement year over year in sales based on X, Y, and Z, what you were doing, what you led, what you achieved, what you built. Use that kind of language. I'm sure ChatGPT could help you with other describing words in that way. And then when you can't use data, because a lot of us can't use data, it's like, but like the team was better, right? Like, I know I did a good job, but like there's no data. Used soft side feedback that you get. I have listed on my resume before something like 7 out of 7 of our executives acknowledged that this was the most highly functioning team we'd ever had after the processes that I put in place. Something like that. You don't have to say 7 out of 7. You can say the executives on my team, I received this feedback continually. Think about how you can take what you know to be true, what you've been told, and turn it into a nugget that's like really impactful for how you've transformed a team or how you've built or led something that isn't as data heavy.
Fabulous.
Those are more general than generalist, but hopefully they help.
Absolutely. Thanks, Maggie. Now, kind of pivoting a little bit from resume to the interview process, Rohan had actually asked, when interviewing for chief of staff roles, do you have any tips for answering questions about long-term goals, especially if you want to be a founder later?
Ooh, that's fun. I think it's really difficult to have a one-size-fits-all answer because you just don't know who's on the other side of the interview. My first thoughts here are just do your research, try to get to know and understand who's interviewing you so that you can learn their story. Maybe they are like super excited about entrepreneurship themselves. Maybe they're the founder themselves. Maybe like through conversations you've found out that they are more of the type of style of leader that want you just like heads down, focused on this job. Learn as much as you can about the person that you're interviewing with so that you can tailor your responses in a genuine way to what they're going to want to hear from you. So entrepreneurship, for example, lean into it, I don't think there's anything wrong with saying something like, I'm going to make it, I'm a great chief of staff for these reasons. This is why I'm going to help you transform your company, or I've helped companies scale in the past. Now I want to do it as a chief of staff. In the pursuit of someday, I want to own my own company. So that makes me even more driven to succeed here, even more like tie it back to what you're trying to accomplish in the job interview, tie it back to that as you're talking about entrepreneurship. But yeah, I definitely think that you don't have to shy away from it, but do your research first.
Love that, Maggie. And I also resonate with that too, actually. And so thanks so much for that question. Another question that came up, and just back to defining the chief of staff role. How do you define the chief of staff role in a venture capital?
It doesn't, the core purpose of the chief of staff role, I have not seen change across industries, across size, all the different ways that chief of staff roles show up. The core purpose, which is the definition I shared, I popped it into the comments, to truly like maximize the leader's time, allow them to stay in the vision space. That core purpose is likely the same. In a venture capitalist world, if you're working for the VC side, like the VC company, you may be working with us, like helping multiple companies scale some processes and build out all offsites and all hands and board meeting materials. You may be helping multiple companies if you're kind of doing chief of staff work for the VC side. But if you're a chief of staff for, I guess, a venture-backed company, it's going to look the same. If you're a chief of staff for a venture capitalist business leader, someone who's like leading the VC firm, it's going to look the same. What are their key priorities? How do you drive them forward? How do you drive alignment across their leadership team? The product might be different. The things on the paper might be different, but the core functions of the role are the same. So it's a fun opportunity to say, what do I want to get into? I want to learn about the VC world. I'm going to go try to find a chief of staff job or a similar type work in the VC world, because you really do intimately learn that industry through the chief of staff work from the business leader.
Fabulous. Thank you for that as well. Got a couple more questions here, Maggie. You hanging in there. You're a popular one.
Happy to help.
Okay, so this one, Karishma asked a question in regards to the office of an executive. So how can a chief of staff help create a well-functioning machine by the way of the office of an executive or the office itself?
Okay. They can own the entire process. So oftentimes the chief of staff is the first chief of staff. It's a growing, we all know it's a growing role. A lot of chiefs of staff are stepping into first ever chief of staff jobs. Even if it's not, you can still own this as a chief of staff. And this is honestly exactly what I did in my corporate role. You step into the role and the very first thing you should do is document current state. So this is regardless of the question that was just asked. The first thing you should do as a new chief of staff, if you haven't done it yet and you're a chief of staff, just do it now. Document current state, and start with the rhythm of business. What are all the meetings happening? And what are all the topics? What are who's there? What's the purpose? When are we, and this could come down to like, when are we looking back at past business? When are we looking future at, 5-year plan, next year, future product launch? When are we looking operationally at things happening right now, like something that just launched, or literally like operations reviews and scorecards? Document current state for your back office, everything your leader's involved in. And that may include like where they show up in their VP's all hands, for example. What are they attending? What are all the things? Document it. The reason for this is because if it's just in your head, if it's swirling around, it's changing all the time. Executive offices are constantly changing priorities, which is normal. If we aren't documenting it, we're not going to be able to see opportunity, and we're not going to be able to see things clearly. So we have to document it to see things clearly. And then that's when the magic happens for being able to basically strategic recommendations coming in. So being able to make strategic recommendations based on what you're seeing. And this is just a small example of the rhythm of business, of like that documenting the current state. While you're documenting current state, you are going to find a lot of opportunities, low-hanging fruit. You're going to figure out that, oh gosh, we probably don't talk to employees enough, or people are asking for this one thing and we're not giving it to them, or we don't have a meeting for this, or a leader, or a whole function. A chief of staff is somebody who should and can be able to look at the business and determine the needs and solve the problems. So if you are like, okay, we've got a hefty rhythm of business, we've got a lot of sales reviews, my leader's involved in a ton of external and internal meetings. They need to be prepared all the time. They're showing up externally all the time. I need to prepare them for that. I need to recommend where they're going externally. How do I do all this? The answer might be that you can't, which means you need to build a role or build a back office function for them. So whether that means, you have a team of chiefs of staff on your chief of staff team as part of your executive's back office, that may be a component. I mean, from my personal experience, I slowly and methodically built out like org maps for what I wanted my team to look like over time. And I was like 3-6 months ahead. And once I had it ready and I thought it was time, I popped it in front of my executive and kind of assumptively closed and was like, I think we need this for this reason. If you have an issue, let me know. And then we'd go and hire. And that, ended with, we've had a team of 7 and we were running really smoothly, and he was more prepared than he'd ever been for everything he walked into, and his executive team felt more aligned and all of the things. So you take initiative, you put recommendations together, you observe a lot, you test and learn, what do we need, what's working, what's not working, and then you build out the team.
So we've defined a bit of the chief of, actually a lot of the chief of staff role. Thank you so much for that. We talked a little bit about for those who are trying to apply for chief of staff roles, what they can do for their resumes, how they can elevate the interview experience. A question that also came up is when you're a chief of staff, what could progression actually look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think there's any wrong answers here. To parallel that, like I talk to EAs all the time, and one of the things I say often with EAs is that I grew up hearing that like, don't get stuck in a support role. You can never get out of a support position, and like those types of things. You guys have probably heard that sentiment too. It's just absolutely not true. Anybody can leave any job at any time. You can build skills, you can network, you can find resources. Confidence is often the hardest thing, especially if you've been told like, oh, stuck in a support role. It's just not true. Chiefs of staff, I mean, a similar sentiment. You can do whatever you want, really. There's a great parallel to entrepreneurship, which I have some things here to share. I'm happy to do that. Because you've learned a business from the top, you've managed and juggled a million things at once. You've had to figure out priorities. You've figured out really like the importance of brand and product and communication and leadership. Hopefully, as a chief of staff, you're probably much better suited to be a leader than most entrepreneurs who haven't been a chief of staff, who just have a product and they've never led people before. And the other thing is that a lot of chiefs of staff are just like great number two, like great in the background. They don't want to be a public facing like CEO, leader of a whole company. They don't want to be on stage. That's okay too. It's really common for a chief of staff to go to like a COO role or a director role or marketing. The same feedback I give EAs is the chief of staff is really well positioned to learn the whole company and figure out what they want to do. They can see all the business leaders. They can figure out what work they're drawn to, what people they like, who to have like coffees with and just ask about their job. There's really I don't think there's any guardrails really for what a chief of staff can go and do after being a chief of staff. And many stay. I know a lot of chiefs of staff that are on their third, fourth chief of staff role. But chiefs of staff love variety. That's why we're in the role. So it's also okay to switch it up and go do something else.
Definitely agree with that. And one of the other questions that came up too is when you're a chief of staff, what are some ways that a chief of staff can elevate their skills? I know your company currently offers a certification, so definitely happy to plug that. But Sharon also asked, are there any sort of additional courses that you would recommend chief of staffs to take?
That's why I built the chief of staff certification course, is because I got finished building out my role as a chief of staff, building 7, 8 roles under me as chiefs of staff. And I realized that there's hundreds, thousands of project management certifications out there and literally nothing for chiefs of staff. Nowhere that you could go get hands-on practice doing the things chiefs of staff do every day, build confidence, competence, all of that. So that's why I built Nova Chief of Staff. Obviously, we're here because there's also some great membership communities where you can get education like this, right? Like that's awesome. In terms of hard skill courses, I know that people do take project management courses and things like that. I do get asked fairly frequently about specific finance courses. I don't do a deep financial review in our course because of what I shared earlier. And also because what I shared earlier being like, just learn the top 5 or 10 in your company. But to elaborate on that a little bit, all of our backgrounds are very different. My background and what I've learned financially from the retail world at Nordstrom and the tech world at T-Mobile and my MBA, which by the way, we can talk about if I think an MBA is necessary for chiefs of staff. I don't. It's going to be very, very, very different than Nia's background and her financial. She may be like super well versed in another category that I don't know anything about. So it's most important how you approach the role. So when you think about a course, if you're like, yeah, but I want to get this specific job in this specific industry and I just want a little bit more financial support there, find a industry specific financial course or resource. And a lot of times those resources could look like, what are the top 20 retail math metrics out there? And you can Google that and find those and deeply learn and understand those metrics. You're going to learn the best on the job anywhere. You're going to learn the best on the job. But yes, of course, we have our Nova Chief of Staff certification course. It really dives into the foundational aspects of the support that you give an executive, regardless of industry, regardless of company size, all the things. We don't need to go into that further, but yeah, I don't necessarily have other courses for chiefs of staff in my head. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Maggie. And I think we've gone through a really great breadth of the questions here. I know you wanted to dive a little bit deeper to the entrepreneurship side of chief of staff. So happy to go down that route. And if anyone has additional questions, please definitely feel free to keep asking them in the chat.
Yeah. I think what we can do is just chat through a little bit about why, because this is although I love that this is just all of us regular people talking about the chief of staff role. That's like what I do all the time. But because we did tailor this a bit for entrepreneurs, there's probably a few people on the call that want to dive into this. So feel free to pop your questions in for kind of this entrepreneurial conversation too. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is that if you are a future entrepreneur and you just don't have a product or company yet, the chief of staff role is a really, really, really good option for a lot of the reasons we've been talking about. You learn from a leader at the top of a company. You can identify the C-suite model, the executive office model. You get to see senior leaders who have been leaders for sometimes 10 or 20 years, literally run a company. You get to be in the room with them. You have to and have the privilege of like navigating your executive presence, networking, relationships with high level leaders. You truly, like we've talked about, are going to be able to learn how to operate a company, the rhythm of business, that component that we were talking about documenting. Executive project management. I think there's a very, very important, strong thread of executive project management throughout the chief of staff role and also senior EA roles. Communications. I was like, I haven't really been in much of an intense marketing work until being the founder of Nova Chief of Staff. I've gotten a little mini MBA there. But communications and events too. Like I can throw a great event, throw a great party, but when you think about doing it at a company level and then you add communications into it, things like, when do I talk to my people? Like, okay, there's a tornado. I'm in Nebraska. We had a crazy tornado a couple weeks ago. Do you email your team after that and talk about, okay, our state went through some things and here's how I feel about it. How are you all feeling? I've been able to witness some really, really great leaders that absolutely have the beloved following for how they communicate with their teams. And so communications is something that like chiefs of staff get a front row seat to, if not drafting these communications for their leaders. Understanding the value of offsites and all hands and like employee culture driving activities. As an entrepreneur, if you have not experienced an offsite with a leadership team, how are you going to know that you need to go do an offsite? Like, how are you going to know that? You're just not. You're not going to realize like, oh gosh, I should probably go take the weekend and like just think about strategy for a couple of days. You just haven't seen people do it and you're bogged down in the day-to-day every single day if you haven't experienced these things. So truly as a chief of staff, you're able to identify the models, the systems, the processes necessary to support your senior leaders. And you're building a lot of those systems. So when you think about, okay, I want to be an entrepreneur someday, but oh my God, how would I even do it? That question's not there anymore. You're like, this is what I need. This is the information I need. I've built it before, so I'm going to have someone help me build it, or I'm going to do it myself for a minute to really help you succeed as an entrepreneur. And then I think like another piece I was reflecting on here is like the level of depth that a business leader dives into is really interesting. I think we think that everybody at the top of a company is an expert at everything and that they deeply dive into their numbers and they deeply dive into probably employees and culture and all of the things. And that's just not true. It's very, very high level. Now, a lot of business leaders are technical in background or they should be able to dive in when necessary. So they have the foundation to dive deep when they need to, but they're looking at numbers maybe once or twice a week, maybe a quick screenshot daily of the most important 2 or 3 or 5. But a lot are not. A lot are in a review once a week, and they need to know the most important 5 or 10 things. So understanding the level of depth that business leaders go into can go a really long ways when you become a business leader yourself. And then I think the final part here is just navigating how to work cross-functionally with other leaders, with vendors, with partners, identifying partners, buying products, all the things. Chiefs of staff are a mini CEO in a lot of ways, because you are navigating the full breadth of this leader's business. Even if the leader's business is a category of a company, you're still touching every single piece of it. The sales, the people, the marketing, like you're touching every single piece of that one leader's business, and watching how they navigate it. And I think if you can watch somebody do something for 12 months or 18 months, you come away with a lot of information if you're paying attention really closely. So that's kind of those are my thoughts on why it's great for entrepreneurship. A lot of entrepreneurs can't hire a chief of staff yet. They don't have the money, or they haven't, they're just can't even think about it yet. So the biggest takeaways probably for me would be similar to what we've been talking about. Make sure you're documenting everything. You're building processes, repeatable processes for everything, and that you are ensuring that you have strategic time to work on your business, not in your business, to think about the strategy of your business at all costs. You have to build that time. And as an entrepreneur and as a chief of staff, you learn that pretty deeply. So I will pause there. Happy to talk through job description stuff. We're getting close to time though, and I don't have a ton there, so we can also just go back to questions. Nia, totally up to you.
I do know, given the entrepreneurial side of the chief of staff role and its possibilities that you've shared, Jess asked a really great question. Can you share more information about fractional chief of staff? Fractional's been a really big buzzword nowadays. Can you tell us a bit about your thoughts on that? Maybe some spicy takes too.
The hardest part about being a fractional chief of staff is finding the work. Everybody knows they need an accountant. Nobody knows they need a chief of staff. So you got to sign up knowing that. I actually left T-Mobile to do fractional chief of staff work. And I thought, I'm just going to build this little course on the side. We'll see how it goes. Course has exploded, and I still do consulting, fractional chief of staff consulting. And I love it. And I think just like Jess asked, and Nia, what you talked about, the beauty of the chief of staff role is learning new industries and getting exposure in different things. And it's so fun to be oh, I don't know anything about government, but I'm going to go be a chief of staff to this Nebraska official and learn all about his industry, and offer a lot of value, because they also need the value of a chief of staff that I can offer. So it is a buzzword, but it's very valid. Fractional work, a lot of people believe fractional work is the work of the future. It's hard to find people to work for. It's hard to sell them the chief of staff role. So, network with everybody, tell them what you're up to, and what you want to do, and the problems that you will solve for them. Not about you, it's about them always in your sales pitch. But yeah, I hadn't heard about the term fractional until I told somebody that I wanted to do chief of staff consulting for companies that didn't need a full-time chief of staff. And they said, "Oh, you want to be a fractional chief of staff?" And I was like, "Tell me more about that word." So yeah, it was new to me a couple years ago too. And I think it is definitely the future.
And you mentioned, when you're in I'm biased. I love being a chief of staff, and I totally see so many possibilities. And I absolutely resonate with what you mentioned, Maggie, about how you get to play in these different industries and these different business functions as a chief of staff. It's the fastest way to accelerate yourself, actually, in a professional setting.
Totally agree.
With that said, you mentioned a little bit about on the business versus in the business for entrepreneurial side of chief of staff.
Yeah.
Could you share a bit more tips on how one of us can enhance our skill sets and learning more on the business?
Yeah. I mean, it's basically what are the small tasks that you're doing every day, the emails, the replies, the prep, and how do you like really step back and move to that 10,000-foot view and think through, what does the business need? Like, what is my ultimate goal? What's the business's goal? What's my leader's goal? And how do I get there? And if you are able to step back and have that 10,000-foot view, you can think through a few key strategic pieces of work that you need to develop and build and work on that will then drive your daily tasks going forward. I mean, the daily tasks are always there. It's a huge part of our everybody's job. But it can't be to like no end. It should be for the purpose of to ladder back to a strategic goal, and something that's definitely more at the 10,000-foot view. So that to me happens like quarterly or so. I will take myself on a solo offsite to a nearby city and stay at a hotel. And I will spend a day and a half mapping out priorities, objectives, future, where I want to go, what I want to do, how do I get there, and then choosing which ones do we actually pull off the wall and go take. Um, so yeah, it's definitely a balance in terms of the day to day. I don't find a lot of time in the day to day besides like looking. I have like a Kanban board over here, like looking at my sticky notes and getting reminded and kind of the major overarching goals and purpose. But it's very, very important to make yourself pull out, think, you know, as a visionary for your company.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I know just with the interest of time, I do want to make sure we highlight what is the best way to continue asking our questions, because I think you've really sparked in all of us wonderful thoughts. And I could see that some of us are still processing, and I'm sure we'll have future questions to ask. What's the best way to ask and connect?
Yeah. So a lot of us are probably already connected on LinkedIn. Definitely connect, follow on LinkedIn, Maggie-Olson-COS. I offer coaching. We do a lot lately. I've been doing a lot of like job description review. Okay, now how do you tailor this for the interview? That's been pretty fun. You can find that on our website. Check out the Nova Chief of Staff certification course syllabus. If you think that it might be right for you, I always say first dive into the syllabus. And we've got a lot of students on the call and some grads too, which is cool. But dive into the syllabus. Think about if you could get benefit from at least half of the things on there. Practice, hands-on practice, before enrolling. That's something that I tell everyone. And other than that, yeah, just reach out. We're happy to help, and I love to be connected. And Clara and I have a great partnership, where our students receive the first month to her community free, and her community receives $100 off our Chief of Staff certification course. So if that's something you're interested in, just let us know and we'll make that happen for you.
Absolutely. So for everyone here, thank you so much for asking wonderful questions. And I've already added in the chat the link to Maggie's LinkedIn, so you can connect there if you haven't yet, and also the link to the certification course that she mentioned. So make sure to already save that. And with that said, Maggie, thank you so much for sharing your wonderful insights, time, and energy, and
Of course.
immense expertise, by the way.
Oh,
So
glad.
thank you so much for what you do to really educate and create awareness for the Chief of Staff role that we all want to be, want and are continuing to live by.
Yeah, I love it. We're all very like-minded. So you guys have a good one, and thanks for being here, and don't be a stranger.
Thanks, Maggie, and thanks
Okay,
everyone. Bye.
bye.